Good evening, welcome to a brand new series on Crushed Custard. This is called Spotlight On. Now what we're going to be doing in Spotlight On is we're going to be taking one artist, could be anybody, and both myself and the man in the attic will be talking about one or two of their particular albums. So one artist for the whole episode. And today, the first one, I'll tell you the way we actually came about this idea was purely by chance that the man in the attic happened to sort of send me two videos from the same artist. And suddenly a little light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, why don't I do a couple as well that are in between those two and make it a special? So if you've got some bands or you've got some artists that you would like to hear me and the man in the attic have a little chat about, well, not necessarily together, but talking about separately, maybe later on in the year when a little bit more technically proficient and we've learned how to do the split screen thing, we might actually have a chat together. But in the meantime, we'll do it the way we're going to do it today. So if you've got any ideas, whack them in the comments. Don't forget as well to keep giving me some more numbers, because I have to start using the number generator for the album numbers. We'll have another random album generator game out in a couple of days as well. So in the meantime, let's get on with this. And today I can tell you well, you probably know already, because you've probably seen the title, haven't you? The first person in today's spotlight is Gary Moore. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to the man in the attic who'll be talking about a Gary Moore album.
It's this one. The Gary Moore Band, Grinding Stone. This dates from, believe it or not, 1973. And, here we go, there's the record. It's on the proper old orange CBS label. So, quite an old album for Gary Moore. In fact, as far as I can tell, this is the first time that he ever appeared on vinyl. And there we go. Here we are. The Gary Moore Band, Grinding Stone. There's the rear sleeve. Picture of Gary just here, and two other members of his band. It was just basically a guitar, bass and drums band, but they do have a couple of additional musicians who guest on this. The personnel was Gary himself on guitar and vocals, a fella called Pierce Kelly on drums and percussion, John Curtis on bass, and the album contains contributions from Philip Donnelly on rhythm guitar, Jan Shellhaas on keyboards, and Frank Boylan on bass. Doesn't say which tracks. I mean, obviously the keyboards, you can tell on the tracks that they're on. So there you go. This was Gary Moore's first ever foray into the world of vinyl, and on a major label. So there you go. I don't think he really appeared on vinyl again until much later in the 70s with Thin Lizzy and his own solo records, the first of which was Back on the Streets, which I think came out towards the end of the 70s. But what's it like? Well, it has elements of quite a lot of things in it. It opens with a track called Grinding Stone, which is 7 to 8 minutes of an instrumental. Then it's got a couple of fairly standard rock tracks of the Time to Heal, and a slower one called Sail Across the Mountain, both of which have vocals on. And as far as I can tell, Gary Moore's responsible for all the writing. Let's have a quick look. Yep, all composed by him. So, yeah, in between this and his next solo record, quite a gap, probably 5, 6, 7 years maybe. So again, what's it like? Well, Grinding Stone's pretty near the kind of thing that he did with Colosseum. Sort of rock fusion, jazz fusion instrumental. Instead, the next two tracks are fairly standard rock tracks. Then side 2, you get the Energy Dance, which is just a couple of minutes long, but it morphs into the next track. Spirit, which is 17.5 minutes long, and that's purely instrumental, those two together. The first one, The Energy Dance, is a keyboardy intro track, 2.5 minutes long, and then into this track called Spirit, which meanders on for 17.5 minutes. It's very good, and again, very reminiscent of what he would go on to do with Colosseum 2. So yeah, Gary Moore's first one, and nicely produced. The last track, which is called Boogie My Way Back Home, has an acoustic slide intro with him singing along, and then goes into a sort of mid-paced blues riff, which would probably then echo stuff that he did in his blues period in the 90s and further on, when he had still got the blues albums, and at that period where he was playing exclusively blues music. But yeah, this album hints at Gary Moore's potential, and he was obviously brilliant even then. I mean, you wouldn't get a major label like CBS signing you up if they didn't think there was some prospect, but obviously they didn't follow it up, because he would appear later on Vertigo with Thin Lizzy for Black Rose, and I think Bad Reputation. Or am I wrong on that? Probably. But and then he would be with Virgin for his solo albums of the late 70s and early to mid 80s. Yeah, but good. It was something that I picked up years ago, during the 70s, about 76, 77. And I prayed, and it's got it on there's actually got one of those proper CBS covering in the sleeves. I think if you can see here, it's got the catalogue number, where it was stored in the second-hand record shop I bought it in, and the price, 99 pence. So what a bargain. I would imagine it was something that didn't sell an awful lot at the time, and probably holds a little bit of value now. Again, probably not much more than 20 or 30 quid, but it isn't going anywhere, so it's NFS, not for sale. But yeah, good. If you ever come across it, I don't know if it's ever been released on CD. Most likely not, or if it has been, quite limited. There's almost in some of the guitar work a bit of the it's not as rock orientated, the guitar work, as he later came to be. There's almost hints of Santana in this, and funny because they were obviously label mates on CBS at this point in time. So yeah, but worth searching out if you do ever see it. It's one worth having, because it shows someone who went on to be terrifically influential in his own right, displaying his own influences at an early period. And on Saturday's influences would have included Santana. There's definitely that kind of tone to his guitar. And I hate to say it, but yes, there is a Deep Purple connection to this, because this album was engineered and produced by none other than Martin Birch. So yeah, quite a strong Purple connection. Anyway, Gary Moore, Grinding Stone, CBS, 1973. Worth a look out.
So it wasn't until 1978 then that Gary Moore made another album which just had his name on it. This was just a Gary Moore album, whereas that previous one was credited to the Gary Moore Band. Of course, he went off and was in Thin Lizzy for a while. He came back and recorded this one, Back on the Streets, with a picture of Gary Moore coming out of Wormwood Scrubs. Now, this copy I've got here isn't my original copy. I did have a copy of this, and it's one of those ones, but I don't know what happened to it. It disappeared. This was a replacement copy that I got in that collection that I bought, that I told you about when we were talking about Jonathan Edwards the other day, and I noticed that my copy had gone, so I kept this one. It's a budget reissue, I think. Subsequently, it's got very little information. I seem to remember that the original one had got an inner sleeve, but I can't remember. This one hasn't. It's just got the plain envelopes. It doesn't tell you a great deal about who's on it and who isn't on it. Gary Moore is obviously doing the majority of it because it's a Gary Moore album. He's playing the guitar. Other people that are on it, Don Airey is on it playing the keyboards. Phil Lynott and Brian Downey from Thin Lizzy both make guest appearances, and Simon Phillips is playing the drums on quite a few tracks. So there's some good musicians on here. Now, this is probably more of an album for a Gary Moore fan than just a casual fan. It's like a lot of instrumentalists' solo albums can be. It can get a bit bitty because they don't know whether to sing on it or not. I don't know, this one obviously he's got Phil Lynott to help out. The proper sort of version of Don't Believe a Word, if you like, the slower version, which is always good. Not a particular fan of the opening track, Back on the Streets. That's not that brilliant, but there's 2 or 3 good instrumental workouts on this. If you're into your sort of instrumental songs, there's one called What Would You Rather Be or a Wasp, which I think is a great title. Hurricane is another one, Fly the Snow Moose. Great opportunities for Gary Moore to show you just how fast the guitar player he was at the time as well. So if you're a fan of Gary Moore and you're a fan of real sort of fast guitar playing, you're going to really like this. Of course, it's got Parisian Walkways on it as well, which is the reason probably that most people buy it. It's surprisingly short. I'd forgotten how short the studio version of Parisian Walkways was, because obviously the live session, it used to stretch out for quite a while, and there was that bit, wasn't there, where he used to go and he used to get that note and see if he could keep it for as long as he could keep it. Now, I can tell you a story now because all the people involved in this are no longer around, so nobody can get into trouble apart from me. We snuck into a Gary Moore sound check, me and a couple of people I probably shouldn't name. In those days, what I used to like to do, if there was a gig in the week and I wasn't particularly busy that day, I wasn't at work or something, I'd like to go in the afternoon. And what you could do is you could go, and quite often you would be able to get in to the place where the band was on if you knew where you were going, because there wasn't any security, there wasn't any door locks. You could get in the back and you could go in and watch the sound check. Once, I was very sneaky on this, I was at Leicester and I'd been in the pub in the afternoon. I was having a drink. With Mel Galley at the time, and it was when Neil Murray and Cozy Powell were in Black Sabbath, and we were going. It was a Black Sabbath gig, and we decided to sneak in and watch the sound check. Mel Galley said to me, "Come on, go watch the sound check," and we went in the back, and we got shouted at from the stage. I don't think they knew who we were. We didn't know what it was, but we had to leg it back to the pub pretty sharpish. But anyway, we did that as well at a Gary Moore gig, and what he used to do, I don't know, I'm giving too many secrets away, but when they were doing this, he used to walk around the stage finding out where was the best place to stand to get that note to sound right. It was fascinating sort of watching that. But anyway, gone off on a bit of a tangent there. So yeah, this album, it's good. If you like guitar playing, it's a guitar album more than anything. I know a lot of his later albums were more sort of, middle of the road, more accessible to everybody. This one, there's a lot of instrumental stuff on it. Maybe some of the tracks that aren't instrumentals are probably the weakest one, obviously with the exception of Parisian Walkways and Don't Believe a Word with Phil Lynott on as well. But yeah, that was his first proper solo album, and well worth getting a copy of. Now, this is where the Gary Moore solo stuff really takes off for me. And this was right in the time when I was going to gigs every week, 2 or 3 gigs every week and all that sort of stuff. And there just seemed to be so much going on in those days, not like now where bands take 3 or 4 years to put an album out. People were flitting around from band to band and stuff. And this, when this came out, Corridors of Power, Gary Moore. Now, he got Ian Pace and Neil Murray on it. So he's taken the engine room from Whitesnake. He's got the engine room from Whitesnake on this album with Gary Moore playing the guitar. It's always made me wonder if when Bernie Marsden left Whitesnake, David Coverdale ever considered Gary Moore as a replacement. Gary Moore probably wouldn't have wanted to go. Anyway, I don't know. But this, you've got Ian Payson, you've got Neil Murray, you've also got Tommy Eyre on the keyboards, and it feels like a band. If you listen to this album, it's like a Whitesnake album of that time. It's like a Rainbow album of that time. It's structured like a early 1980s rock album, and it's really good. I mean, I must admit, I hadn't played it for a few years until I played it this afternoon, and I forgot how good it was. I'd always got it in my head that the vocals let it down because Gary Moore wasn't quite as good a singer, but I realised I'm comparing him to the singers in Whitesnake and Rainbow, and this is when he's developing. Singers develop, especially non-singing singers, if you know what I mean. If you listen to most instrumentalists when they make solo albums and they sing, the more albums they make, the better they get. Bernie Marsden's a perfect example of a person who's improved tenfold as a singer. Gary Moore, the same, I would say, that at the end of his recording career, he was 10 times as singer as at the beginning, but he's far better on this than I remembered. And it's great. I mean, Don't Take Me for a Loser is just a classic early 1980s crunching rock song, and then you go bang into a ballad of Always Gonna Love You. Then he does a cover of Wishing Well, which has got to be a brave thing to do, because, I mean, Paul Rodgers is the greatest rock singer ever, and Gary Moore's going to try and sing one of his songs. Plus, you've got Kossoff guitar, and you've got Gary Moore guitar. Now, in some ways, you probably couldn't think of two different things, but Kossoff was all about space and not playing very fast, whereas Gary Moore could play a million miles an hour. This is a surprisingly good version of Wishing Well, and I like it. I don't like that many people that cover free tracks for obvious reasons, but this is really good. Then you've got a couple of probably lesser tracks to finish the side off, a little bit more sort of softer tracks again, which was what was sort of in vogue around then. So then you get into the second side, and then you go into the sort of rock epic type things. End of the World with Jack Bruce playing on that as well, and that was a great song, really good when they played it live as well. The only track on the album that I don't like is Rockin' Every Night. I just think that's a throwaway song. It's definitely filler. It's not very good at all. One of the ones I really like, Cold Hearted. I mean, that a lot of people probably think that's a bit part track on this album, but I love it. I think it's brilliant. And then, of course, I Can't Wait Until Tomorrow, which is absolutely fantastic and was even better live. I mean, this was, to me, this is probably my favourite Gary Moore album. I probably like this better than all his blues stuff. I'm not counting the Thin Lizzy stuff, because obviously the Thin Lizzy stuff, Black Rose album, is way up there. This, for me, is the best album with Gary Moore's name on it, on the top. Just Gary Moore, not a band. And you can see how much I play this. I mean, the cover is a bit sort of creased and stuff. Luckily, the record is still immaculate. I've played it today. You can't even hear a crackle anywhere at all. And I bought this the day it came out. Still got the price ticket on it. £3.99 for a brand new album. Now, the man in the attic was saying to me, he said, didn't that come with a free single? Now, I can't remember. Now, all my singles I kept in a trunk because I never bought that many singles. I did start with, but I stopped buying singles in about 1984, 85, apart from my sort of big bands which I was collecting and whatever. And I don't play them at all because I'm too lazy to get on putting them on for a start off. So they just stay in the trunk. So I don't know whether I got a free EP with mine. And I bought it on the day it came out, so you could argue that I should have. But of course, back in those days, there was no internet. There was no sort of thing to sort of check and say, oh look, if you get it now, you get a free. You just had to rely on the music papers, and the music papers came out on a Thursday, and the albums normally came out in those days on a Friday before they changed it. They changed it to Monday, don't they? It used to be a Friday anyway. So you got a full week of chart activity. And sometimes it wasn't until the week after they'd been out that they were being spoken about in the paper, so you didn't know and you'd already bought it. So I honestly don't know whether I've got a copy that's got the free EP with it or not. It doesn't say anything on the cover, but I'm guessing it wouldn't. So there you go. So there is a copy of this with a free live EP. I haven't got it, I don't think. Might have. Who knows? We'll see. But anyway, if you can grab on a copy of this, it's a really, really good rock album from the early 80s. You think of the albums that White Snake, Rainbow and bands like that were putting out, and even the bands that were coming through, like your Def Leppards and your Iron Maidens and all them, this is right up there with some of the best albums that came out in the early 80s. I was just surprised, and I just had a look earlier on today, and it only got to number 30 in the album chart, which just shows you how much good music there must have been around at that particular time. So the next album that Gary Moore recorded after Corridors of Power was Victims of the Future, a year or two later. Now, this one was... the thing I found interesting with this today is that I haven't got a copy of it on vinyl anymore. Now, I know I used to have one. Now, whether I lent it to somebody or whether I got rid of it in a colour, I don't know, because I remember being a little bit disappointed in it at the time, because it didn't seem to me to be the same as Corridors of Power. Corridors of Power had got as I just said earlier, a feeling of a band about it, with Ian Pace and Neil Murray and Tommy here on most of the tracks. Just the odd track here and there with other people on. This one is chopping and changing all over the place. You've got Ian Pace and Neil Murray on some tracks. You've got other people coming in on lots of it. It's got a really bitty feel to it, this album. It's also suffers a little bit because it's got Empty Rooms on it as well, which has been overplayed to death here, when you wouldn't mind if you never heard that again, despite the fact that when you do come back to it after a long time, it is quite a good song. A lot of it appears to be heavy for the sake of being heavy. The track Murder in the Skies is, to use the word bizarre isn't really fair. It's, first of all, let's say it's a good song. I like the song, the music, the riff, the melody, the verse, or whatever. It's okay. The lyric, I just find odd. I don't know why anybody would feel the need to write that particular lyric in that form, in that type of music. Protest songs, yeah, I've never been a fan of all these political protesting songs. I think music's supposed to be fun, supposed to enjoy it. It's not supposed to be it's not supposed to be about protesting. That the protesters do their own thing and let the music people do theirs. Personally, I went to see Gary Moore quite a lot around this sort of time, and I don't suppose we took a great deal of notice at the time, in being that much younger, about the lyrics and about the rights and wrongs of it. But somehow it just seems wrong to me for people to be there jumping around, enjoying themselves, singing a song about a plane getting shot down, and all those innocent people being killed, and the lyric has got no depth to it whatsoever. It just goes on and on about the same 269 people and the murder in the sky and all that. It's a totally pointless lyric to me, and it doesn't make sense. I just wish he'd have written a different lyric and called it something else. Other than that, it would have been a good song. So for me, that's probably, to be honest, one of the reasons why I never really talked to this album. That was and it's a pretty awful cover of Shape of Things as well, with Noddy Holder on backing vocals. It's very bitty teenage idol. I don't like either. And this, to me, I mean, initially we weren't going to include this album in this particular episode, because I don't necessarily like talking about things in a negative way, but because it fitted in, because the album that the Man in the Attic is going to talk about next is the live album that was done from this tour, and the live stuff was brilliant. They picked the right songs to play, and they were great. This is just, for me, it's too much of a transforming album. You've got the version of Gary Moore where he's got Ian Pace, and he's got Neil Murray. Neil Murray's about to go back to Whitesnake, I think, isn't he? Ian Pace is about to join the reformed Deep Purple, and so you just think about this and you think, well, is it songs that were left over from the sessions from before, or is it ones that they came in to do, and then by the time they come to do the rest, they'd gone or weren't available? It's despite the fact that all the musicians are on it, good Bob Daisley and all sorts of people are on there, you can just tell it hasn't got that feel like the Corridors of Power album had. Corridors of Power album, as I said earlier, it's got a feel of a band. This hasn't. This has got a feel of a guitar player making a solo album, and a guitar player making a solo album who's maybe running out of ideas for this particular type of music. You can see why he went the way that he went towards the end, playing more sort of blues stuff. And I think I'm correct in saying that Gary Moore himself said this was all his rubbish attempts at heavy rock, but he's doing himself a bit of an injustice there, because there are highlights to it. But this is, if you're only going to get one Gary Moore album from his rock time, because we've got to totally, as we said earlier, separate his blues stuff, because when he sort of reinvented himself, if you like, as making pure sort of blues albums, totally different altogether. But this one is the weakest of the rock albums, I think. But second, it's got some good bits on it, and there are some good songs in there, as I'm sure the man in the attic will tell you about right now.
Gary Moore, We Want More. Now, this is a live album recorded in 1984, and is a real fair representation of his live set at the time. It was recorded, there's the back of the sleeve, and it is a gatefold, so there you go. There's the inside with all these tour dates for 1984. It was recorded in Detroit in June 84, the Tokyo Budokan in February 84, Glasgow Apollo in February 84, and one track recorded at the Hammersmith Odeon in February 1984. Now, the February tracks feature Ian Pace on drums, but the ones recorded in June in Detroit feature Bobby Chouinard on drums. I think we all know why Ian Pace wasn't in Gary Moore's band in June 84, because the wheels were rolling for the Deep Purple reunion at that time, and those February dates would have been Ian Pace's last ones with them. I did see Gary Moore during this period of his life. Was it the albums Corridors of Power and Victims of the Future, which I think both featured Ian Pace, and at one point featured Neil Murray on guitar. So Deep Purple connections are plenty there. I did see them, I think it's in August 82 at the Marquee Club. And those of you who know that, the old Marquee in Wardour Street in Soho here in London, you were right up front. And so it was really good to see Ian Pace at very close quarters. He was my biggest drumming influence ever, without a doubt. And Gary Moore was great at this time. You know, it was his real hard rock period. Of course, he went on to the extremely successful. I mean, he was successful enough with this kind of thing. You know, Back on the Streets, Victims of the Future, Corridors of Power, and then the album that featured Glenn Hughes on some tracks, Run for Cover. But this is good. This is a good album. Wouldn't put it up there in the all-time classic live album status, but it's a real fair representation of what Gary Moore was like if you went to see him live at those times. It features Murder in the Skies, Shapes of Things, and Victims of the Future from Detroit with Bobby Chouinard. And the Ian Pace tracks are Cold Hearted from Tokyo, End of the World from Glasgow Apollo, Back on the Streets from Glasgow Apollo, So Far Away from Glasgow Apollo, Empty Rooms from Glasgow Apollo, and Rockin' and Rollin' from Hammersmith Odeon. And also on the second disc, which is not a full album, it's a 33 RPM 12-inch single, if you like. So there's only 4 tracks on it. And there's Don't Take Me for a Loser, also recorded in Detroit with Bobby Chouinard on the drums. And it's good. Moore was a really, really good singer, wrote some very, very good songs. Of course, he went on to his probably more profitable, Still Got the Blues period in the 90s. Sadly, no longer with us. Very sad. Also, another Deep Purple connection on this album is that on bass on this album, it's not Neil Murray, it's Craig Gruber, who I think was the bass player for Elf, the band that Ronnie Dio came from. So, you know, there's so much interchangeable with bands around this period. But yeah, if you like Gary Moore and you don't have it, it's a good album to get. It's terrifically well recorded, great live sound, and yes, as I said, a fair representation of what he was like if you went to see him in this period. He was great when I saw him at the Marquee, but then, like, I was, you know, like a few yards away from the stage, and a fantastic show. But you know, it's got some good tracks on this. The version he did of Shapes of Things I always really liked. Very good. Blackstone Cherry went on to do something similar with it some years later, but it's a classic tune anyway, so works well. Good all in all, you know. Great guitar from Gary Moore. I mean, come on, he is one of the finest. We know that, and again, a sad loss. When I went to see Deep Purple towards the end of 2022, and Simon McBride was on guitar, I thought, yeah, he's influenced by Gary Moore, and yes, he is. I mean, he's Irish as well, so it was bound to be. But Gary Moore, an influential guitar player, who's influenced a lot of people. You've got to say his place in the pantheon of rock from the early 70s right the way through to the 2000s is assured. He is regarded by many as one of the best, and you've got to say his career was very varied, from kind of jazz fusion with Colosseum. Get it if you haven't got it. You will probably pick it up for not too much money. I'd probably say you get this for under 20 quid, and worth having. Or if you can get it on CD, worth having. Gary Moore, again, yes, sadly missed, and but well represented on this album. Well represented indeed. A fine addition to your collection if you haven't got it, so go for it. A shorter review maybe this time, but nonetheless, Gary Moore, we miss you.
If you enjoyed tonight's episode on Gary Moore, please consider pressing the like and subscribe buttons. We look forward to seeing you again soon.